There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from chasing a dream for so long that even the people who love you begin to wonder if it's ever going to happen. Not because they stop believing in you, but because time has a quiet way of convincing everyone that some stories simply aren't meant to have the ending we imagine. In June 2024, millions of viewers watched a woman step onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent. Within minutes, she received a standing ovation. Her audition spread across social media. Television audiences called her unforgettable. Headlines celebrated what appeared to be the arrival of a brand new star. To the world, Sydnie Christmas seemed to appear overnight. But overnight success is often the longest illusion in entertainment. Because what those few minutes on television could never reveal were the thousands of days that came before them. The auditions that ended in silence. The opportunities that disappeared without explanation. The nights spent wondering whether hope itself could become a burden. This isn't simply the story of a woman who won a television competition. It's the story of what happens when someone refuses to surrender a dream long after the world has stopped expecting it to come true. And perhaps that raises a question worth sitting with. How many extraordinary people quietly give up one day before their life was about to change forever? That question lives at the heart of Sydnie Christmas's journey. Stay with us, because the years before Britain's Got Talent reveal far more about her character than the victory itself ever could. Long before millions heard her voice, Sydnie Christmas had already devoted much of her life to music. She didn't grow up believing success would arrive easily. Instead, performing became something deeply personal, a language through which she understood herself and connected with others. Friends and colleagues often described her as someone who loved performing not because of fame, but because she genuinely loved telling stories through songs. That distinction matters. Many people dream of being famous. Far fewer dream simply of singing. Sydnie belonged to the second group. As she grew older, she worked wherever opportunities appeared. Musical theater, live entertainment, private events, cruise ships, small productions. Each performance sharpened her craft. Even when hardly anyone noticed, the audiences changed, the venues changed, the paychecks often remained modest. But one thing rarely changed. She kept showing up, day after day, year after year. To outsiders, those years might have looked ordinary. To performers, they represented something else entirely. Because every artist understands that the most difficult audience isn't the crowd sitting in front of you. It's the voice inside your own mind asking whether all this effort is actually leading somewhere. For Sydnie, that question never completely disappeared. The entertainment industry has an unforgiving relationship with time. New faces appear every season. New competitions begin. New trends replace old ones. Every year that passes without a breakthrough quietly whispers the same message. Maybe this isn't your moment. Maybe your chance has already gone. For many performers, that whisper eventually becomes louder than their ambition. Dreams don't always die dramatically. Sometimes they simply become too exhausting to carry. Yet Sydnie continued, not because success was guaranteed, but because singing remained the one place where disappointment briefly lost its power. She continued auditioning. She continued training. She continued believing that somewhere, someone might finally hear what she had spent years trying to offer. There were disappointments that never appeared in newspapers, callbacks that didn't become contracts, auditions that ended with polite smiles but no phone call, projects that seemed promising before quietly disappearing. Every performer knows those moments. The public rarely does, because rejection in entertainment is strangely invisible. Nobody films the walk back to the train station. Nobody interviews the person who wasn't selected. Nobody applauds persistence. They applaud results. And results were taking a very long time to arrive. Financial uncertainty became another quiet companion. Building a career in performing arts often means balancing passion with practicality. Bills continue arriving regardless of artistic dreams. Rent doesn't become cheaper because someone has talent. Life demands stability even while ambition demands risk. Like countless performers across Britain, Sydnie had to make difficult choices. She worked. She saved. She adapted. She continued searching for opportunities wherever they appeared. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't cinematic. It was simply real. The truth about perseverance is that it rarely feels inspiring while you're living through it. It feels repetitive, sometimes discouraging, often invisible. Yet those invisible years become the foundation beneath every visible success. Looking back now, it's tempting to imagine destiny quietly guiding every step toward Britain's Got Talent. Reality was almost certainly less certain. There were likely moments when giving up would have seemed perfectly reasonable. Moments when choosing a more predictable life might have offered relief. Moments when another unsuccessful audition made continuing feel almost irrational. But there is something remarkable about people who keep going without guarantees. They aren't driven by certainty. They're driven by possibility. And possibility, even when it becomes painfully small, can still be enough to change an entire life. As the years passed, Britain's Got Talent remained one opportunity among many. Not a promise, not a certainty, simply another door that might never open. For over a decade, Sydnie had been preparing without realizing precisely what she was preparing for. Every performance taught control. Every disappointment taught resilience. Every audience taught connection. Without knowing it, she was becoming the artist millions would eventually meet. She just hadn't met them yet. If you've ever spent years working toward something that seemed impossible, tell us in the comments what kept you moving forward. Because sometimes another person's persistence becomes exactly the reminder someone else needs today. What Sydnie couldn't yet know was that 2024 would ask her to step into the biggest spotlight of her life. And everything she had quietly endured would suddenly matter. Not because the struggle disappeared, but because, for the first time, the entire country was finally about to see what had been hidden for years. The opportunity she'd spent more than a decade chasing was closer than it had ever been. She simply didn't know it yet. By the beginning of 2024, something had shifted. Not in the headlines, not on television, not in the public imagination. The change happened quietly, almost invisibly, inside a woman who had spent years learning how to stand back up after disappointment. Every audition that hadn't worked, every opportunity that slipped away, every performance in front of a small audience, they had all become part of the same lesson. Preparation isn't always obvious while you're living through it. Sometimes life spends years building the person before it opens the door. For Sydnie Christmas, that door was Britain's Got Talent. When she finally walked toward the audition stage, she wasn't a newcomer hoping for a lucky break. She was an experienced performer carrying more than a decade of unseen work. That difference mattered, because confidence isn't the absence of fear. It's the ability to walk forward despite carrying it. As she waited backstage, thousands of thoughts could have filled the silence. Would this become another rejection? Would anyone truly understand the years that had led to this moment? Would this finally be the chance she'd spent so much of her life chasing? The audience couldn't hear those questions. They simply saw someone smiling. Television often captures the performance. It rarely captures everything a performer carries onto the stage. Then came the introduction. A few moments later, the music began. And almost immediately, something extraordinary happened. The room changed. It wasn't simply because Sydnie possessed an impressive voice. Talent competitions have featured remarkable singers for decades. What made this moment different was something more difficult to describe. There was honesty in her performance. Every lyric seemed connected to lived experience rather than technical perfection. The years of uncertainty, the disappointments, the persistence, the quiet hope that refused to disappear. None of those experiences could be seen directly, but somehow they could be heard. Within moments, expressions across the auditorium began to change. Smiles became astonishment. Silence turned into complete attention. Then came the applause. Not the polite applause offered out of courtesy. The kind that arrives when an audience realizes they're witnessing something they didn't expect. By the time the performance reached its final notes, people were already standing. A standing ovation. For viewers watching at home, it looked like the beginning of an extraordinary career. For Sydnie, it may have felt like years of invisible effort finally finding its voice. The judges praised not only her vocal ability but also the emotion she brought to the stage. That emotional connection quickly became one of the defining features of her journey throughout the competition. Millions of people soon watched clips of the audition online. Social media filled with reactions. Many viewers described feeling moved to tears. Others admitted they had replayed the performance multiple times. The internet celebrated what appeared to be an overnight sensation. But those who had followed performing arts understood something different. This wasn't overnight. It was the public finally discovering someone who had spent years becoming ready. Success has an unusual way of rewriting history. The same people once overlooked suddenly appear destined for greatness. The years of uncertainty become compressed into a single sentence. She became famous after Britain's Got Talent. Technically true, emotionally incomplete. Because fame didn't create Sydnie. Persistence did. Yet winning the audience was only the beginning. A television competition doesn't reward one unforgettable performance. It demands consistency. Every new round introduces greater expectations. Every appearance invites comparison with the last. The applause becomes louder. So does the pressure. As the competition progressed, Sydnie faced a challenge familiar to many performers. How do you repeat a moment that seemed impossible the first time? Each week brought another performance, another rehearsal, another opportunity to prove the previous success wasn't an accident. The schedule became increasingly demanding. Long rehearsal days blended into interviews, media appearances, wardrobe fittings, vocal preparation, and endless planning. Behind every few minutes shown on television stood countless unseen hours. Audiences witnessed polished performances. They rarely saw exhaustion, or self-doubt, or the responsibility that comes with knowing millions are watching. Public admiration can be deeply encouraging, can also become intimidating. Every compliment quietly raises expectations. Every viral video creates pressure to deliver something even greater. Artists often discover that success introduces fears they never had before. Before recognition, the greatest fear is never being noticed. After recognition, the greatest fear becomes disappointing everyone who finally noticed. That emotional transition is rarely discussed. Yet it affects countless performers. Sydnie now carried not only her own hopes but also the expectations of viewers who believed she could win. The weight of encouragement can sometimes feel almost as heavy as the weight of failure. Still, she continued. Performance after performance, week after week. She remained composed under extraordinary public attention. That composure should not be mistaken for ease. Professional performers often become experts at hiding anxiety. The audience experiences confidence. The performer experiences responsibility. Those are not always the same thing. As the competition approached its final stages, the atmosphere intensified. Each remaining contestant understood what was at stake. For some, it represented career advancement. For others, lifelong validation. For Sydnie, it seemed to represent something even more personal. Proof that the years of perseverance had not been wasted.